Welcome to Democratic Television, a program of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party that brings insights, perspectives, and attitudes of our always thoughtful Democratic guests. Our focus today is on local government, and our guest is Cory Wolbach, a Palo Alto City Councilman. Thank you for joining us, Cory.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
So, we've known each other for some time, but I'd like to share with our viewers a little bit about your background. Are you a native of Palo Alto, or you've come from other places like lots of folks around here?
Well, I claim being a native, but I actually moved there when I was 2.
I see.
I was born in Illinois. Dad's from New York, mom's from South Dakota, but we moved there when I was 2. Grew up there. I've also lived in a couple other spots around Silicon Valley, in California.
What brought your family to California?
My dad got a job. He got a job in the pharmaceutical industry, and he'd left academia, where he'd taught medicine, and was working for Syntex up in the Stanford Research Park.
Ah, good, wonderful, great. And what part of town did you live in as a kid?
It's called the Palo Verde neighborhood. It's kind of in the southeast portion of the town, in the flood zone. So definitely my neighbors and I are very sensitive to the risks of climate change and sea level rise.
I imagine. What do you remember from your time growing up, going to school? What was Palo Alto like? Is it much different than it is now?
So I actually don't think it was terribly different. I mean, it's a slightly larger city. There's definitely been some changes in our downtown, physically. I think it's a little bit livelier now. I think the downtown's a lot more fun than it used to be. We've lost some of the mom and pop stores, so that's maybe the downside. And we've definitely lost some of the socioeconomic diversity. It used to be a town where you'd have normal people living, and now you have normal people working there, but only the elite or the retired or house rich and income poor living there.
I know a lot of our Silicon Valley communities have experienced that, where lawyers and teachers and firefighters and such used to live in the neighborhood, and now many drive a great distance to come to work in our communities, and so it's kind of an unfortunate change.
Very, very much the case in Palo Alto. We're actually, for a city our size or larger, we're the most expensive median rent in the country. And we also have the highest jobs to housing imbalance, in the sense of over 3 jobs for every employed resident. So for everybody in Palo Alto who has a job, there are 3 jobs in Palo Alto.
Wow.
And that creates a lot of demand on housing and a ton of traffic, as anybody who comes to Palo Alto in the morning or leaves in the afternoon sees.
Right, that's very interesting. I know that can lead to a lot of competition for housing. What's the dynamic that's been driving that for Palo Alto, from your observation, both from living there and being in government?
Well, as I mentioned, I really think that the jobs housing imbalance is the crux of the issue. All right, and this is what we've seen in other urban centers around the country that are popular, that have more successful economies, and around the Bay Area, that we've been adding a lot of jobs for years, but we haven't really been keeping pace on the housing or on the transportation infrastructure, leading to higher housing costs, lots of competition for the housing, and more people clogging the roads.
Do you think some of the great economic success in the area has, you've mentioned that you felt that the community hadn't changed except for in some dimensions, for example, socioeconomic diversity and more competition for the housing. Have there been any other kind of more fundamental things that you felt have changed in the community in the time that you've lived there, either in your youth or more recently in being in government? Well,
let me first answer kind of the counterpoint, which is something that I think has stayed the same, which is we tend to be a pretty progressive town. Our proximity and history with our founding being right next to Stanford, I think it brings a lot of intellect, a lot of intellectual rigor, a lot of intellectual curiosity to the town, and I think that tends to lead people to be more politically progressive. When you're open to facts and reason, I tend to think that leads people to be more likely to be Democrats in America. And so we have a pretty progressive community, and I think that's
your recollection from being a young person that adults in the community were progressive and had those values?
Absolutely, and I think that that's still the case. And so we haven't lost the essence of our community yet.
Yeah,
I think that's important.
But I think that it sounds like what you're experiencing is what a lot of communities have, which is the values where they meet policy and action can really be strained when economic or climate or other forces put pressure on the community, and it seems like that's what you're experiencing.
I'd agree.
Yeah. So what brought you, was there anything about your life experience in Palo Alto that led you to become active in local government and in politics?
Well, both my parents met in anti-Civil War activism, and so there was always an interest in civics in my house growing up, which is awesome, and I wish everybody had that. And we always had the News Hour with Jim Lehrer on. Actually, it was the McNeil Lehrer News Hour when I was growing up, and then Jim Lehrer, and no longer now just the News Hour. So
you'd have people on your kitchen table planning an action, or mom and dad would be off to a protest or a meeting?
Well, they weren't doing as much of that by the time I was growing up, but at least we were thinking about those issues. But what really inspired me to start paying attention to politics on my own was reading about the drug war. That was the first issue that got me really interested in politics.
Now, what do you mean by the drug war? Because that's meant a couple of things. There's the war on drugs and...
Yeah, the war on drugs. And so the San Jose Mercury News did a 3-part series when I was, I think, end of junior high school, early high school, early 90s, mid 90s. And just looking at what are the consequences of the war on drugs? And this wasn't the Gary Webb Dark Alliance series. This was earlier than that. And it just made me realize that there are times in America where right and wrong don't fall down party line. That sometimes even the Democratic Party isn't pushing hard enough for the right policies. And so Clinton was president at the time, and we're still waging a war on drugs that was devastating and causing a lot of problems throughout the country. And that was kind of what woke me up to realizing even my own party could do better.
Well, I want to come back to that a little bit, but I'm wondering, when you were in upper middle school or first years of high school, did you find other kids in Palo Alto, would be interested in such issues, or did you find a few people who were?
To be honest, I was kind of that geek who was into politics, and all my friends said, "Really, Cory?"
Really? So now, don't you think it's ironic, because I won't engage in any ageism, and I'll ask you not to as well during the show, but a lot of folks of younger generations than my own are not disparaging so much of print media, but really have moved on from it and are mostly into digital media. So had that not quite happened yet? I'm trying to remember the timing. Yeah, you read about it in the Mercury News, and I'm curious.
Yeah, well, Mercury still publishes online, and this was early mid '90s, so this is before everything had gone digital.
Completely transformed over to that, or started this more migration to it. Yeah, interesting. So now I want to put you on the spot just a little bit. President Clinton and the war on drugs. That part of being a politician is being successful enough to get into the office, to be in a position to do something, and then being able to get things done. And I think that at the time, as I remembered it, the pundits would really credit President Clinton with sort of finding things that he could either come to common ground on or trade off. And I just wonder, in your political career, have you found yourself in positions where you felt like you had to make those kind of choices, and what guided you, and how did you come down?
Yeah, well, even before my own political career, just my life, and I think of really every citizen as a political actor, right? We can vote, we can influence, we can lobby as citizens, and I was a lot more idealistic and hard-nosed about progressive politics, in a sense, when I was younger. So when I first got a chance to register to vote, I was so frustrated with Clinton's compromises that I registered Green.
Wow.
As opposed to Democrat, out of protest. A few years later, a guy named Barack Obama, I'm sure you heard of him, inspired me to come back around to the Democratic Party.
Good.
And also I realized that sitting on the sidelines in a third party, in a two-party system, doesn't really get you anywhere. And the Democratic Party was where my friends were, people I respected were, and we have a two-party system.
We're certainly glad to have you, and appreciative of your involvement. So, but later, getting into office, I'd like to know, because I think that a lot of candidates reach that point where an interest group that you're really not aligned in, you really don't share values with, and advocate for positions that you're likely to oppose or would be inclined to oppose, offer support or seems to be willing to give support, and they want you to say something or be something or do something. Can you think of a circumstance where you've decided, well, you know what, I'm not really going to go for that support because it's not who I am?
Let's see. So what I actually try and look for are the places where there seems to be a divide, but there actually could be some common ground. And sometimes, it works out and sometimes it doesn't. A prominent example for us in Palo Alto, a couple of things that affect single-family neighborhoods. One is the discussion of single-story overlays, saying that in certain neighborhoods, if a supermajority of the residents say they want to limit any structure in their neighborhood to only one story, there's a process by which we can do that in the city. And I used to be very skeptical of that, and I tend to think, if my neighbor wants to build a two-story house and paint it pink with purple polka dots, go for it. But I listen to my neighbors, and I listen to the people who are really concerned about this issue, and they actually won me over into understanding the merits. Yes, but there's also kind of another issue that affected single-family neighborhoods that I saw as kind of a trade-off. And that's accessory dwelling units or granny units or in-law units. And for me, the way to balance these issues is to say, if we're not going to let people go up, let's at least let them go out, right? So they could either redesign their house or add an accessory unit in their yard, maybe their backyard or something like that. So that way, if somebody has a growing family or an extended family, they want to live with them, given the housing cost and the housing challenges, if we won't let them add a second story, let's at least let them add that little cottage or something like that.
Yeah. So it's good to be open to being convinced and to look for opportunities to convince others. I guess.
Right.
How do you build coalition to get legislation passed? Do you do the horse trading thing? Has anybody come to you and said, "Well, I'll vote for your favored thing this if you'll vote for my other," or is it really not as explicit as that?
Yeah, I don't think it's as explicit as that, at least at the local level. I think it really comes down to, hopefully, it comes down to people, finding the votes. We have a 9-member council, so the real question is always, can you count to 5, right? Can you get 5 votes? Now, if you can get 6, 7, or a unanimous vote, great, right? It'll be less controversial. If people who might be seen as being generally opposed to each other on critical issues come together on an issue, then that issue is less likely to face blowback from the press or from the community. So it's always nice to get that supermajority or unanimity. But for the most part, I don't think it's you vote for my thing, I vote for your thing. I think it's a lot of tough negotiations and discussions about the merits and about just saying, where can we find a compromise on this issue, right? Is there a middle ground on this issue that we can get to? And some of that happens compliant with the Brown Act with, maybe a couple of colleagues will chat in private, and a lot of it happens on the dais, which leads to a lot of very late night meetings.
I imagine. Well, I'd actually like to talk to you a little bit more about that process because I think that's very fascinating. But we are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will talk a bit about the legislative process and a little bit about the current affairs politically, because I'm curious about your views on those things.
You bet.
Thank you.
Look forward to it.
Hi, I'm Sally Lieber. I'm a former state assemblywoman, and I'm proud to be a Democrat. And I want to invite you to get involved in our local Democratic Party. It's a great opportunity for students, for folks who just have a few hours to contribute, want to volunteer with their kids, or if you're post-career and you want to make a more substantial contribution, we want to get you involved. There are a lot of issues that need your help. There's volunteering on the community and on campaigns. Whatever it is that you're interested, we've got a place for you, and we really want to include you in our movement. So join us at the California Democratic Party. Thank you.
So we're back with Palo Alto City Councilman Cory Wolbach. Thanks again, Cory, for being with us today. And before the break, we were talking about the legislative process and vote counting, and I had one thought I wanted to pursue on that vein. How do you learn to do that? Because with the Brown Act, as you pointed out, you can't set it up ahead of time. You can't talk to enough people to know you'll have the votes. Did you find it hard to develop the skill to be able to count real quick while you're up there and see if you have the votes for a motion or a measure?
That is a skill I'm still developing.
I see.
It is never guaranteed, right?
I see.
And that's
so you're sometimes surprised when the vote really comes down.
Often.
I see.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you do your best to think about where people have been on similar issues in the past, or if it's an issue that's been discussed before, or think about comments they made when they were running for office, or when they've given speeches. And so you do the best you can to try and figure out where they'll be. And I think it's the same thing for anyone in the community who's advocating to us or to any other legislative body. Try and figure out where your audience is. We actually did a council retreat recently where we were talking about how we can be more effective, and our facilitator reminded us that when you're in a legislative body, your number one constituency is your fellow members. Those are the people you really have to pay attention to. But I think it's important for people in the community to remember that if they pay attention, they can often figure out where somebody's going to be, but it's not guaranteed.
Right.
Just like people who watch the Supreme Court, also a 9-member body. Not saying that we're up there with them intellectually or effectively, but people are always guessing, where's Thomas going to be on this issue, or where's Ginsburg going to be on this issue? True. And if you have a long enough record, sometimes it's easy to guess, but there are other issues where we don't know how the Supreme Court's going to go.
That's true. So, given that the fix isn't really in generally, when especially for complicated issues or issues that are getting a lot of attention, what are ways that you've seen citizens advocate effectively? Do citizens sometimes persuade members, or have they persuaded you based on information they've presented or personal stories they've told? What kind of things have moved you?
Absolutely. So I think that you can lobby in a number of different avenues, right? You can do it in a broad public manner through protests or letters to the editor or op-eds or posting on Facebook or Twitter and making that public. You can come to city council meetings and speak during public comment at the start of a meeting and talk about anything you want, whether it's on the agenda or not, or speak to a particular agenda item. And you can write an email, or I think the more personal it gets, the more effective it is. Give your legislator, give your city council member a call. And I think that when you have a chance to actually sit down with somebody, somebody who's or a small group that's really thought about an issue and really understands it, and they've whether they're advocating for in-law units or a single-story overlay, or better flood protection or a better bike route to for safe routes to school. Talking to a citizen advocate who really knows their stuff is hugely informational and influential, because none of us are experts in everything. We all have to be generalists.
Yes, and none of us have had the wealth of experience that collectively that we've had.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I want to come way back. It probably seems like a long time ago now, but how you ended up on council? Was it an aspiration you had all along, and did you follow a path that would lead you ultimately to council, or did it happen in a different way?
Well, for a long time I'd thought someday it would be neat to run for office. I mean, it would be nice to serve the community in that way, but I really wasn't sure what that would be or when that would be. I'd actually studied political science in college. For the couple of years prior to running for council, I was working for a local state senator. I'd been getting more involved in the Democratic Party, and I wasn't really planning on running for city council in 2014. But I saw that this issue we were talking about before, the housing crisis, really, I didn't really see people talking about it in the way that I saw it. And I was kind of looking for people to jump into the race, expressing a view at least similar, to see more people in the race with views similar to how I felt, and I didn't see anyone do it. And
what were the views that were expressed and represented, and what was the one that you felt you brought to the race?
So, remember, we actually got to vote for 5 people that year, so I was really looking for 5 people I could vote for. And when I didn't feel I had 5 enthusiastic votes, that's why I ended up getting in myself. And frankly, some friends said, why don't you run? And that got me thinking about it. And first I said no, and then I said yes, and ended up doing it. Actually, I said no, then I said maybe, then I said probably not, and then ended up coming back.
With 5 seats up, were there a lot of people running already when you jumped in?
So there were a few people running already. We had some incumbents, and we had some new folks as well. What I saw a lot of was kind of business as usual, or stop everything. And that's a gross oversimplification, of course, but that's kind of the gist that I saw. And not a lot of people saying, we do need more housing, but we don't need more office development, or at least not a lot right now, that we should really shift our focus. So not anti-development, but pro-housing among what development we have.
I see. Do you think it was a generational difference? Because you were quite young when you ran. Compared to some candidates.
I was 33. But Palo Alto has a history of younger folks. Joe Simidian was, I can't remember exactly how old he was when he first ran. Mark Berman, Sid Espinoza, the late Gary Fazzino.
So there was some precedent of doing it. But on that issue of housing, did you feel like that as a young person you felt the need to have more housing, build more housing, or have more access to housing?
We see it somewhat as a generational issue, but I see people of all ages that are really worried about this, and including a lot of people who are retirees who've been in Palo Alto or in Silicon Valley for decades, who remember when we had that diversity, and they miss it. And, the community at any age group is divided on the best way forward, but I don't think it's strictly generational.
Yeah. There's a compliment of sorts that I've heard seasoned political types make to young people who run for office, and it's something along the lines of, "Oh, that's a bold move," and the suggestion is that maybe it's a little bit too bold. Did you get much of that feedback when you ran, or did you find people who were pretty supportive?
So it was a mix. I think for everybody who was critical, there was somebody else who said, we need more young people to run. It's great to have fresh blood. And if somebody was critical or raised an eyebrow, I would either mention the precedent in Palo Alto, or I'd point out, hey, I was 33 when I was running, and when he was 33, Thomas Jefferson was writing the Declaration of Independence. So what was I doing with my life?
What did you do to win? What made it possible for you to win? What was your strategy?
Knock on a lot of doors.
Yeah, talk to a lot of people.
Talk to a lot of people, really listen to them.
Yeah.
Make sure that I was clear about why I was running, make sure I was clear about what was important to me, both in a stylistic approach to governing and community conversations, emphasizing rational discourse and civility, but being open to vibrant debate, and then also on the policy issues. But honestly, targeted voter contact. For anyone who's thinking about running for office, it's all about targeted voter contact, getting that list of voters.
You spend your time knocking on doors, but not everybody's doors, because you can't see everybody. You want to talk to the people you think are going to be receptive to your message. Exactly,
and the first thing is to figure out who's a registered voter. So you can get that data from the registrar of voters, and you can either go through it yourself or buy software that you can plug the data into and figure out who's actually a registered voter, and if you want to target within that or target your message differently for different folks. It's kind of campaign 101, but luckily, having been involved in the Democratic Party and having friends who'd been involved with the party,
I've been in some campaigns.
I had a leg up in understanding how to run, a basic campaign.
What advice would you give to younger Democrats who might want to be thinking about running? I think that often they'll get the advice, well, spend some time on a commission, be involved in the party. Eventually, kind of your term will come. And I sometimes sense from young Democrats who are very capable, like yourself, and they feel like they don't want to wait and they want to act now. They have ideas, they have concerns. How would a person decide whether it's time to do it now or to continue to kind of lay the foundation for it?
Well, even before I'd gone to college and before I studied political science, I had friends who knew I was into politics and said, "Are you going to run for office someday?" And I would just say, when I would vote for myself, that's when I'll run. And then years later, when I realized I was in that position, that's when I decided to run. That's when I stopped saying no and finally started saying yes to those who were trying to encourage me.
Right.
I think it's important to look in the mirror and say, is this somebody who I think is ready to serve?
Right.
And think, is there anyone else who's going to do it as well as I will? And if you think there is somebody who's going to do it as well as you will or better, then
work with them.
Work with them, or if you're ambitious, improve your skill set, study up more. I think it's good when we have more than just one good candidate running for a spot.
Right.
And I think it's important, if you have decided to run, if you're willing to invest the time in the campaign and serving, do it. Think through, what are my core values? What's my vision for the community? What are some policies that will help make that vision a reality?
Right.
And talk about them with your friends. Talk about them with experts. If you're thinking about running for city council, talk to current and former council members. If you're running for school board, talk to current and former school board members in your district and ask them, what am I really getting into?
Right,
So at
yeah.
least you'll be well prepared for the good and the bad that's going to come.
Right. What's a surprise in terms of what you got yourself into? What's one thing that you didn't expect or didn't realize was going to happen?
I got to be honest, I haven't been shocked very often, because I did talk to a lot of people, and I always asked them.
Did your homework.
I did my homework, and I asked them, is this a crazy idea or a totally crazy idea?
Right.
Is it a bad idea or a terrible idea?
Yeah.
But it's actually been a lot of fun.
Yeah. What's the thing that you're proud of having been able to do as a councilman?
Introducing legislation on a couple different items. I was a co-author on something to increase our minimum wage, and now we're doing that throughout the county. I was the lead author on something to make it easier to add accessory dwelling units, as we were discussing before. I've just submitted for early staff kind of unofficial feedback something about campaign finance reform for Palo Alto, because we've seen costs of campaigns really skyrocketing the last couple of years.
Right. Wonderful. Those sound like really worthwhile initiatives. We haven't talked at all about the general state of affairs. How is Palo Alto doing under the Trump administration? Are you facing trouble or kind of going your own way?
Well, I think Palo Alto will always go its own way, but we're in California and we're in the Bay Area, and so it's easy, right? We can support each other.
Exactly.
Right. And something else I was an author on was a resolution that we submitted and passed in December. Right, we wrote it right after the election, passed it before the end of the year, saying that Palo Alto is going to protect everybody in our community, and we're going to make that a priority regardless of immigration status, race, gender identity, sexual orientation,
Fabulous.
or ethnicity.
It's important to set those standards, because then law enforcement officers, staff members, even council members understand where the city stands and how they should behave.
Exactly. And our staff actually felt very supported by that, because our police department already has had a clear policy, that, for instance, that they don't collaborate with ICE.
Fabulous, fabulous. Well, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today. It's a great community. I love Palo Alto, and I'm very glad that you're there on their council and providing good, strong Democratic leadership on council. So
I appreciate
thank you for your work.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for watching DTV. Give us a call at 408-445-9500 or visit our website at www.sccdp.org. Help us to make a difference. We'll see you on the campaign trail.